Good morning. Seems strange to get up here and when I talk and you don't have a preacher in the house. Well, we do have a preacher in the house, a retired preacher. But, that always seems kind of different to me. But then at one time when I taught one lesson, I had 4 of them in the house. And I'm not sure which way was worse. Because I was awful nervous with having all those preachers and knowing that they all knew more than what I did. This week we went over to Thomas is in the choir over at the middle school, 6th grade choir. And we went over to the choir, to their program, and the first song they sang was Amazing Grace. And it was really, really nice. And we forgot to tape it. Otherwise, I'd have played it up here this morning. And I marveled at it because I think when you look at the choir, there's about 40 girls and there's 3 or 4 boys. There ain't too many boys, even in the 6th grade choir. And when they get the big choir together and they have all of them together for what they call Cougar Noise, there are 2 8th grade boys and 2 6th grade boys in the special choir and stuff there. And I told Thomas, I said, boy, you guys might be in trouble next year if some more boys don't decide to come out. It's just going to be you and his little buddy, one of his friends, Sammy, who comes up to Thomas's shoulders if he's that. He's just a little fella. But he got enough energy for about 3, 4 boys. And he liked being up on stage. Dave's been talking out of 1 Samuel. And he's been talking about the last part of it, about the people of Israel wanted a king. Now, if you watched yesterday on TV, England had a new king crowned. Now, their king doesn't do a whole lot. He's more ceremonious than anything right now. And their family, they don't really have a leadership position in too much and everything else. But England has a new king. Did you watch that ceremony? How much do you think that might have cost to put that thing on? Millions and millions of dollars, I'm sure, because they showed all the soldiers and the people that came from all the other countries and everything else, and all the things going on, and it showed the crown that he put on. They put on his head. Said it weighed 5 pounds. And the only time that crown is used is when they crown a new king. Elsewise, it just sits in storage. And they had a carriage there, and the thing was gold. No, I don't think so. But it was layered with gold on the outside, and he rode in that thing. And the only time it's used is for special occasions like that.
It weighed 4 tons, though.
Yes, 8,400 pounds, it said. I said to Sharon when they said that, I said, why don't they just say 4 tons? I guess 8,400 pounds sounds more impressive. Now you think about all that pageantry and all the good things. And last week when David talked about Saul and the people said, we want a king. He said, I don't understand it. I brought you up out of Egypt. I fed you while you were out in the desert. I gave you manna. I gave you meat. I gave you water. I watched over it all. When we got into the promised land, he's the one that led them to take on the enemies and kick them out of the land. I have provided you everything. Why do you want a king? And the people said, oh, we want to be just like everybody else. They got kings. We want one. He said, you know what that king's going to do for you? Well, just like we have today. He's going to tax you. He's going to take your young men for his army. He's going to take this and take that and take the other thing and this and that and the other thing. And all to make who wealthy? Him. Him. Who would benefit from all that? He would. And he'd say, I need all this to be able to do one thing, supposedly. Lead. Because isn't that what a king's supposed to do? Why else do you have a king? Why do you have a president? Why do you have a House and a Senate and all the other figures that are supposed to be in government? They are there for one purpose, supposedly. To lead. To give you direction. Why? Because what would the United States be like if there was no leaders? What would a country be like if nobody led? Chaos! You betcha! Now, this morning's lesson is the Good Shepherd. Did you ever see a sheep? You ever see when they get into trouble what they do? Sheep have no clue. They just run. They're scattered. They say sheep are one of the most unintelligent animals there are. You betcha. So the sheep need a what? A shepherd. You betcha. Now, my oldest son right now has a 2-year-old daughter. And most of you have experienced what it's like to raise children. What would it be like if you just left your children do whatever they want? What would it be like if there was no leadership, there was nobody to guide them, there was nobody to provide for them? You had the kids and you said, okay, I'm done. Fend for yourself. Would it work? No. Well, I saw a thing yesterday. They got that big story about up in New York right now with that man on the subway and the Marine vet supposedly. They had protests yesterday. And when they had protests on the subway, they actually stopped the train. So it couldn't run. Everybody's out there on the subway, on the line, tracks and everything else and stuff. And the people were chanting, abolish the police. Now, what would the world be like, our country be like, with no police? No rule. Chaos. Everybody's free to do what they want. No king. No leadership. No nothing. The people of Israel said, we don't want Jesus. We don't want God to lead us. We want a king like everybody else. One of the lines that was read to you out of the verses for today is that God said, I am the good shepherd. What does a shepherd do? Well, there are 8 qualities of a shepherd I've discovered this week. The shepherd sets boundaries. In other words, he's the one that builds the fold and puts it and guides his sheep into the fold. Number 2, he is an example. Oh. Who did you look up to growing up? Your parents? Was there somebody else, an adult or anything else that you might have looked up to too, that you said, they set the example? Was there another kid, slightly older than you, that might have set the example as you were growing up? You looked up to that kid and you said, I'd like to be just like him. Or I'd like to be just like her. And your parents might have said, no, I don't want you to be just like her. Or him. The parent's job was to guide. My dad went off to work every day. Drove up to Mechanicsburg. Went to work, went to the job, came home every day. Why did he do that? Why do you go to work? Make a living. Make a living to do what? to support your family, to be able to provide. So, a shepherd is not only there to set boundaries, an example, but a shepherd is a provider. Being trustworthy. Do you ever think of that as a shepherd? How do you get people to follow you if you ain't trustworthy? They follow you because they trust you. When I was in the military, I always tell you that, I had a sergeant major. Now, I was 19 at the time when I got to Virginia. I'd spent a year already in Korea. As an 18-year-old, turned 19 close to the end of my tour there, got to Virginia, and I had a sergeant major, and the sergeant major was getting near the end of his career. And when I came in, the sergeant major took a liking to me. And he took a liking to me so much that all the other guys in the unit started referring to him as my daddy. Because the sergeant major watched over me because I was only 19. And he thought I needed somebody to watch over me. And my real dad wasn't there. So he stepped in and took his place. And if one of the guys was in there and giving me a hard time and the sergeant major was around, he took care of it. And when the sergeant major needed something done, a special job done, he'd come back and get me. He watched over me. And you know, because I knew the sergeant major cared about me, I put my trust in the sergeant major. And whenever he spoke, I jumped. A leader has to be trustworthy. A shepherd has to be trustworthy. The fifth thing is being sacrificial. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. Now, as the shepherd, he was willing to do something. Lay down his life. You know, David, when he was standing there before Saul, and Goliath was out there, and David said, I'll go fight him. What did David say? David said, I killed the bear. I killed the lion. And who was he protecting when he did that? His sheep. But then he said something else. We hardly ever talk about that. David said something else. David said that God had protected him when he killed the bear and the lion. So therefore he knew that God would protect him when he went down to take on Goliath. So while David was a shepherd to the sheep, who was his shepherd? God was. God was. A shepherd is invested in that flock. Many times the owner of that flock. He had a personal stake in the well-being of those sheep. And we're going to see in our lesson today that God is invested in us. And he has a personal stake in your and my life. He is our shepherd. A shepherd establishes a relationship with his flock. And what do you mean by that? The sheep know him. They know his voice. Do you know when I was standing outside at home, and my sisters can tell you the same thing, when you were standing outside and mom called, you knew her voice. And what did you do? You came running. You came running. When Dad was coming home from work and Mom stepped out the back door and she said, "Your dad's on the way." They didn't have cell phones back then. She just knew by the watch, Dad was on the way. And when Dad walked in the door at 4:30, hands were being washed. Supper was getting out onto the table. It was time. But when Mom called out that back door, it's time to come in. And you heard her voice. There was an instant reaction to her voice. She didn't have to speak twice, because if she did, you were in trouble. She called once. And she said, "Your dad's on the way. Time to come in." And we were moving. The sheep know his voice. Your children knew your voice. If somebody else called, didn't matter. That's not Mom. That's not Dad. A shepherd is a visionary. They're always thinking about the future. Do you know anybody that owns a business that isn't thinking about the future? Do you know anybody that owns a farm that isn't thinking about the future? They tell me that two of the younger Hagees, Tyler and I think it's, I forget the other one, are building a farm. They're building a new barn. A computerized milk with computerized milking, where the animals will just come on in, you wash them, they step in, the computer milk, they step into the stall, computer makes the things attach, they milk, they're good to go. Now, they're building these barns because they're thinking about the future. The shepherd thinks about what's going to happen in the future. My parents, your parents, worried about you, then they said, what's it going to be like for Pat's future, Janet's future, Kathy's future, my wife's future? Boy, would they didn't know they were raising a girl to marry me. They might have had some serious talks with her. About the future. That's what a shepherd does. In Psalms chapter 23, you know it, I know it, but I'm going to read it to you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Sure. Think about that. That's basically saying that God has control of their complete life. He gives them everything they need. From the physical perspective, from the spiritual perspective, everything. And that person, the writer here, the Psalm of David, David says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I have given my life totally to you, and I will be yours forever. In John, where our lesson comes from in chapter 10, in verse 1 through 6, it says, I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize his stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. You know, there was growing opposition from the Jews against Jesus' ministry. And he was telling them basically that when he refers to thieves and robbers and things like that, that they were teachers out there, there were people out there, these Jewish leaders and others that were leading his sheep astray. But Jesus as the shepherd and the Israelites as his flock, Christians, when Jesus called, they did not listen to the Jewish leaders, they did not listen to the false teachers, they did not listen to the others, but they heard his voice, and only his voice. It said that within a fold, you could have multiple herds of sheep. Several shepherds could maybe put their sheep together in a fold at night to watch over them. But when it came time to leave in the morning, and the shepherd came, and the shepherd called his sheep, only the sheep that belonged to that shepherd would listen, because they knew his voice and his call. And those sheep would come at his call and exit the fold. And perhaps another shepherd would come then and call his sheep, and those sheep would come. But they knew their voice, that shepherd's voice, and the sound of it. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. The shepherd didn't just leave his sheep in the fold at night for others to come and steal the sheep. Where did the shepherd sleep? At the gate. The shepherd prevented anybody from coming in, but he also did something else. He prevented any from getting out. How many of you remember the song we used to sing, the 90 and 9? Where they sing this song about the shepherd, and one of his sheep had gotten out. He had 100 sheep, and one got out. And what did he do? He went after that one. Because that was his sheep. And he didn't just care about the 99, he cared about all 100 of them. One time when we were at Anvil, and I told you before, and we were little, I fell asleep under the bench of the church, and everybody else had left. And the church was dark, and I was laying there fast asleep and never knew it. And Dad got halfway home, and they were looking, and the rest of the family was there, and they finally discovered Walt was back in the church. Did they leave me there? Did they? Oh, he'll be okay till the morning. Let's go on home, we'll get a good night's sleep, and one of us will go back and get him in the morning. No. They turned the car around, got one of the people to open the doors of the church, came in, got me, back in the vehicle I went. You see, they found the lost sheep and returned him back to the fold with all of the other sheep. And they rejoiced, I think. They had them all. That's what a shepherd does. lays by the gates. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. Those that came before him, those that it's talking about there, were the Jewish leaders who tried to lead them astray. They were not just thieves and robbers. They were trying to destroy the ministry that Jesus had built up. Eventually, it led to Jesus' death, because in their last attempt to destroy the ministry, they had Jesus put to death, didn't they? Figuring that would take care of it all and end it all. But it didn't. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. What does John 14:6 say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He is the gate. You're not coming into the fold in any other way except through him. You can't get in over the fence. My wife and I are in the process. Every year we used to stick a garden out, until we got fed up with the deer eating it. So one year we put up a fence around it and stuff there, and it wasn't a great fence, and we still had troubles with the animals. So last year we got smart, and we put little boxes up on the deck, and we put a little thing out behind the house, and we didn't have a problem with the animals, and we had lots of tomatoes. But this year I'm determined I'm going to have a garden. And just the other week, we saw two of them. It said 2 deer right in the back of our house underneath the pine trees. So now if I want to have a garden, and I don't want the deer to eat what I got in the garden, I got to build a what? I got to build a fence. And that fence has to be able to do 2 things. One, it's got to protect my garden so the deer and the other small animals can't get inside there. So I will have something at the end of the year. 2, it's got to have a gate. So that during the course of the summer, and I wish it didn't happen, I've got to be able to get in weed. Sure, if you've got a garden, you're going to have weeds. And I've got to be able to get inside. So therefore, that gate serves the purpose of letting me in. But this year we've been looking around and looking for a good way to build a good fence that'll work. We saw what our neighbor built for his a few years back. A 3-foot panel cost about $50 a piece. Expensive garden, isn't it? He's got a decent sized garden, but it looks real pretty. But the idea of the fence is to keep the deer out. But I wouldn't need the fence if they weren't trying to get in. Or if people like Howard would go up to the sporting club and take care of the deer up there. I don't even know if they let you hunt up there. Yeah, I don't know, but that's where they come from. But anyways, the point of this is, if you're going to get in, there's 2 ways to get in. You can come in through the sides and climb over the sides, but only a thief would do something like that. The owner comes in through the gate. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The only way you're getting to heaven is through me. There's only one way in. There's no other ways around. You can't get in. except to put your faith and trust in him. And remember, I said that the good shepherd is trustworthy. You put your faith and trust in them. I'm using my dad a lot, but when I was little, I'd give him my hand. Why'd you give your parent your hand? Why would you, when you're walking along and you're just a young child, why would you give your parent your hand? So they wouldn't get lost. Yeah. Because you trusted them. You believed in them wholly. We'd have Miller picnics, and Dad would get up and play softball, and he could hit a softball. It looked to me like it was way out there. And I thought my dad was the best softball player I ever saw in my life when I was little. And apparently others did too, because he got picked a lot of times first before everybody else. My faith was that Dad could do anything. And maybe you believed in your parents that way too. If you put your faith in God the same way maybe you did with your parents when you were little, and believe that he can do anything, he provides for you. He gave his life for you, Jesus Christ did. There is nothing that he won't do for you. Nothing. Just the same way as your parents did for you growing up. Do you know I made a good salary growing up when we were raising the boys, and my wife went to work too. And there was a reason we both went to work. It wasn't for our benefit. It was to benefit our children, to provide for them, to take care of them. Whether it was clothes or food or housing or whatever it might be. And you can all say the same thing. It wasn't your interests you were looking out for, at least I don't think so. But it was your children. God doesn't put himself first. Who does he put first? You. He gave his only begotten Son. Gave everything he had. What was most valued to him? For you. Is that what a shepherd does? You bet. Unlike the king yesterday who spent all them millions so he could stand on the balcony and go, "Yep, how y'all doing? Yeah, y'all doing?" Whose money did he spend? I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. We just celebrated Easter. And it tells us that Jesus came so that we can have life and have it more abundant. Verse 11 says, I am the good shepherd. He points at himself. I've used a lot of examples this morning, and I like to do that. And I had a boss, and I've told you about him. And sometimes he would make your life miserable. When you did something wrong, he would let you know about it and tear you apart. But don't let anybody else do that. There were rules. He could shred you no sweat. But if another boss came down and thought that you did something wrong and jumped on your case, there were real problems. You were his. And there was a difference between somebody else getting on you and him getting on you, because you were his employee. And if he found out another boss came down and said something to you about some mistake you might have made or something that you'd done, boy, he was down there knocking on whatever door that was, and he was letting them know, you don't ever come down and get on one of my employees. Now, maybe that's because he enjoyed it so much. I don't know. But we knew who the boss was. And there was a reason, and I found out as a manager, why he would get upset sometimes when things weren't quite right. Because he said when he went to a meeting, and if he sat down in the chair, and as they went around with the other manager, and they'd be talking about what's going on, if something came up that was going on in his unit and he had no clue about it, who did that make look kind of foolish? Him! You betcha. So we made sure that when something happened, we left him know about it. So when he got to a meeting, he was right on key with everybody else. And he was right by that standpoint. But it sure didn't feel like it some days. But I will also say that when you did something good, he would also come back and let you know you did something good too. Maybe not quite with the same energy he did when he did something bad. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The good shepherd is willing to give all. He laid down his life while we were still sinners. The Bible tells us that he loved us before what? We loved him. You have a baby. Parents do. Maybe a 20-inch long kid, 8 pounds. You don't want a 20-pounder. 20-inch long kid, 8 pounds maybe or so there, boy, girl, whatever it is. From the moment that child is born, who loves who? That child comes out, and mom sees the child for the first time, and it don't matter if it's a boy or a girl. She says what? I love this baby. Oh, isn't she or he the most beautiful baby you've ever seen? Isn't that the first words out? And then maybe if the husband wasn't in the room there, I had the fortune of being in the room there when all three of the boys were born. And if the husband wasn't in the room, oh, you got to see our baby. And the husband loves that child from the moment he sees that child. When does the child start to love the parents? As it grows. Because the child experiences the parent's love first. And realizes that that parent loves that child with all her heart and soul. And would be willing to give anything for that child. Because it's their child. Have you ever said, when something bad happens to one of your children, I'd rather it happen to me. I'd rather it happen to me. Why? Because you're willing to give all. You're willing to give everything for that child because you love them so much. God sent his son because he loved us that much. Jesus said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve. And to provide a means for what? Redemption. For the children, for the people of Israel, for all. The good shepherd puts the flock's interests ahead of his own. The good shepherd weeps when they weep and rejoices when they rejoice. It talks here, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because of a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep.
That's what the dog's for.
That's what the dog's for, okay.
To take care of the wolf.
When the wolf comes, when the thief comes, when the robber comes, people aren't willing to put their lives on the line to protect. But the Bible says the good shepherd is willing to give all. The hired hand won't. My son got a job, the middle son, because of the fact that when a man was looking to hire, he came to his daughter who was working at the same place as what Nate was and said, is there a person in here who's willing to work? I can find all kinds of people that want a job. But I can't find people willing to work. What's the difference? The worker is a person that cares about the job that they're doing, is willing to put in the effort and the time. They're not just there because they're hired. You know, when it talks about the hireling there, the hireling might have sat at the gate too, but when the outsiders came, the intruders came, he doesn't stand in the gate, and he's not willing to give everything, and he's not willing to put his life on the line in order to protect those sheep. The hireling says, they're not my sheep. It's not my flock. I don't know what they paid back in those days, but I'm not putting forth the effort for only $5 a day or whatever it was back then. I'm not willing to give all. I'm certainly not giving my life to protect these sheep. They're not mine. And that's the difference between the hireling and the owner and the good shepherd. The good shepherd says, they are mine. Jesus says, we are his children. And as his children, we know what he was willing to give. Zechariah chapter 11, verses 16 and 17 says about the worthless shepherd, the hireling. He did not come for the lost, not to seek the young, not to heal the injured, or feed the healthy. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. Here's a question. Who are shepherds? Jesus once said to Peter, feed my sheep. What did he expect Peter to be? A shepherd. A shepherd. Are we to be shepherds? Certainly we are. Do you know each of us is an example to somebody? You are setting the example. Right now, there's somebody watching you in your life, and you are setting the example for them. I told you, when I retire, I got a letter from one of the guys that was working for me telling me about the example I set. I had no clue he was watching me. What type of example are we setting? In verse 14 it says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. And that's what I was talking about. He knew every one of his sheep by name. Jesus says, God said, in the Bible it tells us he knows us. He got the hair on our heads. Unfortunately, in my case, it's not that many. And gets less every day. But he knows your name. He knows you personally. He knew his sheep. Now, you may look at a flock of sheep and you have no clue one from the other. Maybe they all look alike to you. But the shepherd knows his sheep. And he can tell the difference. In John chapter 1, verse 43, not only does it say the shepherd know their voice, but when Jesus called Philip, he said, follow me. He knew the shepherd's voice. He knew Jesus' voice, and there was immediate reaction on Philip's part. He did what? He followed him. In chapter 21 of John, in verse 19, he tells Peter the same thing. Follow me. And Peter followed. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep in verse 15. Jesus had a special relationship with his Father. God knew him, and he knew God. And because of that relationship that they had together, he was willing to do what? Lay down his life for you and me. Now my time is soon going to be up. But I want to key in on verse 16 because it's important to you and me. Up until that time, the Jews were the ones they brought the gospel to. And it was thought by the Jewish people, hey, we're the only ones that can be saved. But in verse 16 it says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. And what does that mean? That means he died for everybody. In Acts chapter 10, Peter is told that he was supposed to eat this unclean meat, and Peter says, I've never done that before, and I'm not going to do it now. And he is called 3 times in a vision to do that. And Peter finally gets the judge when Cornelius comes to his house, finally gets the message of what God meant. God said what others deem unclean was not unclean to him. In other words, the message was not just for the Jewish people, but for the Gentiles also, because at that time it was unlawful for Jewish people to associate with the Gentiles, much less even visit their house. And the Bible tells us that when Peter finally went to Cornelius' house and he opened the door, What did he find? He didn't just find Cornelius and his family there. It says the place was packed with people wanting to hear the message of Jesus Christ. Saul was converted on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9 for one purpose. What was his mission? What was his job going to be, as God told Ananias there when he told him to go over to Saul? Because this man over there that was blind, and God had a purpose for his life. He said, this man is going to bring the message to the Gentiles. And he's going to learn how much he has to suffer for me to do so. It wasn't just Jewish people that were in the fold. It's everybody. It doesn't matter what your race is, what your nationality is. It doesn't matter what your background might be. God died, Jesus died for you and for me, that we all might be saved and have eternal life. The Good Shepherd. I'm a firm believer that when these sheep were in the fold back in those days, when they were there and the shepherd was sitting at the gate, he didn't just protect his sheep that were there in the fold. But if there were other flocks that were in there too, and the animals came and the wolves might come, he was there to lay his life on the line for them also. Isn't it good to know this morning that he came for you and me? He came for everybody, not just one particular group of people. He loves us all. The reason my Father loves me, and that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. The Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities thought they put Jesus to death. They thought they were the ones that put him there on the cross. They were the ones that ended his life. But Jesus said, no, you didn't. It wouldn't have ever happened if I hadn't have left you. I died willingly, voluntarily for you. That's what the Good Shepherd does. The Good Shepherd's willing to give everything. I think I'm losing my voice a little bit here. But it's hard not to get excited when you teach up front. You know that? It's hard not to. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Lord, as we come before you in this morning's hour, we are so thankful that you are the Good Shepherd, that you have provided for us, not only physically, but spiritually and in all ways. We thank you, dear Lord, for Jesus Christ, and that he is the way, the truth, and the life, that we can come to you through him, dear Lord, that he came to this earth and died on the cross and paid the price for our sins, but not only that, that he rose again so that we can have life and have it more abundantly. Dear Lord, in this morning's hour, as we leave this church, may we be an example to you. May we be good shepherds. May we lead our families. May we be as we be an example to others we may come in contact with. Bless us now and make us a blessing, and watch over Dave and Estelle and their family as they come back. In your name we pray, amen.